3 years ago, the area I am currently standing in was under 15 feet of water. As Hurricane Sandy devastated much of the northeast of the United States, an area most people typically don't associate with hurricanes. But that all changed on October 29, 2012, when Sandy and her massive storm surge devastated the northeast.
On October 22, 2012, a tropical wave in the Caribbean was officially named Tropical Storm Sandy. Sandy strengthened into a hurricane 2 days later, before moving into the Caribbean and then into the Bahamas. Then, due to a combination of a blocking area of high pressure over the Atlantic and a trough over the eastern United States, Sandy grew into a massive storm and turned back west, taking a very unusual track before making landfall in New Jersey. This unusual track put New York City, one of the world's most populated and vibrant cities, right in Sandy's crosshairs.
When most people envision New York City, they envision a bustling metropolis. But New York City actually has 520 miles of coastline and has many beachfront communities, such as Rockaway, where I am right now, and this was one of the hardest hit communities during Sandy.
The Rockaways are a peninsula that is part of Queens and sits directly on the Atlantic Ocean with Jamaica Bay behind them, leaving them very vulnerable to storm surge, and Hurricane Sandy absolutely devastated this community. Lifelong Rockaway resident Kieran McGee joined us to talk about his experiences during and after Hurricane Sandy.
It wasn't a windy storm, it wasn't a rainy storm. It was just that the water just flooded the area at such a fast and heavy rate that soon before you know it, our living room furniture was floating around, and there was a river running down our block, and you saw pieces of houses floating down and cars, and it was very fast. There was a lot of it, and it was very real. High tide came, and I heard dripping, like you could hear a drip. We all were quiet, we all wanted to find where I was, and we went to the basement, and in the basement we found the source, and we tried to get some stuff upstairs, we tried to clog it, we tried to nail down the windows, but before you knew it, the water was just rushing so quickly that we had to get out. We just had to get out of the basement.
Sandy's floodwaters were not the only problem for the Rockaway Peninsula. In the Breezy Point community, the largest residential fire in New York City history also burned that evening, and due to the floodwaters, the FDNY was unable to reach and put out the fire, and over 100 homes were lost during the fire. Elsewhere, Sandy's massive storm surge inundated Lower Manhattan, flooding residencies, landmarks, businesses, and worst of all, subway tunnels. New York City needs its subways in order to properly function. Without the subways, New York City comes to an absolute standstill. And after Sandy, the city was without the subways for 4 days, while the MTA worked diligently around the clock to restore service. Once the subways were up and running again, life in New York City slowly began to return to normal. However, life is never the same after events such as Sandy, and there has now been a new focus on mitigating any future events. Patrick Klein, a lieutenant with the Garrison Beach Fire Department, joined us to discuss what has been done to help prevent this from happening again in the department's area of jurisdiction.
The City of New York has changed our flood zone from a secondary level 1, a secondary evacuation for a more powerful storm, to a primary evacuation for whenever there's some sort of tropical storm coming. We'll be the first area to evacuate now. Also, there's the Belt Parkway runs along the southern side of the neighborhood. They've done a lot of work there, and I think one of the objectives is to make the parkway a better barrier between the water from the bay coming into the neighborhood.
Preparations such as this are being enacted all across the city in order to mitigate any future events. Back in Rockaways, where some of the most work has been done, the beach has been extended, there are new sand dunes, a new seawall, and permanent sandbags have been added. Elsewhere, various gate and tunnel plug systems are being tested to hopefully prevent the subway tunnels from flooding again. If one thing is certain, if New York City is hit by another storm, it is much more prepared now than it was in October of 2012.
New Yorkers have lived through blackouts, terrorist attacks, and now a hurricane. There's one thing that is true about New Yorkers: they are resilient, and they'll always rebuild, and rebuild stronger than what they had before in order to prepare for future events. And New York has done an excellent job in preparing for any future hurricane with several mitigating factors. For Whether or Not, I am Brian Mastro.